Welcome to Sephardic U Presents, the podcast where we explore the rich and diverse traditions of Sephardic Judaism. I'm your host, Nathaniel Pool.
And I'm your co-host, Sam Bendayan. In this episode, we'll delve into the Hanukkah traditions of Morocco. But first, let's set the stage by talking about the history of Hanukkah itself.
In 165 BCE, that long ago, the Jewish people were living under the rule of the Seleucid Empire. King Antiochus IV, also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, sought to suppress Jewish practices and impose Hellenistic culture. This led to the Maccabean Revolt, which was a courageous uprising led by Judah Maccabee and his brothers.
That's right, and against all odds, the Maccabees defeated Antiochus's forces and reclaimed the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. During the rededication of the temple, they found only one small jug of pure olive oil to light the menorah. Miraculously, the oil lasted for 8 days, which is why Hanukkah is celebrated for 8 nights.
And while Hanukkah celebrates the triumph of faith and perseverance, the way it's observed has evolved across Jewish communities worldwide. But today, we're focusing on the unique traditions of Morocco, where Jewish life has a rich history of over 2,000 years.
That's right, and many may not know this, but Jews arrived in Morocco after the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE. Many settled at the base of the Atlas Mountains, where they maintained traditions reminiscent of life in ancient Israel. Their customs, including how they observed holidays like Hanukkah, were shaped by both their deep-rooted heritage and the influences of Moroccan culture.
Well, Sam, we're partial to this since we're both of Moroccan descent. I was born there but left early, but I've got a surprise for you. And somebody who's going to help us uncover these beautiful traditions. We're thrilled to welcome my mom, Deanna Amar Pool. Deanna's family has lived in Morocco for 2 millennia. That's 2,000 years.
Wow.
Her father, my grandfather, Joseph Amar, served as the Administrative Secretary General of the Council of Israelite Communities of Morocco, a long title, but he was in charge of overseeing Jewish communities across the country.
Deanna will share her personal memories of Hanukkah in Morocco, how it was celebrated in her family, the spiritual significance, and the unique traditions that made it so special.
Deanna, welcome to Sephardic U. We're so excited to hear about the Moroccan traditions of Hanukkah and what makes them so distinct.
Thank you, Nathaniel and Sam. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am very happy to share the beautiful customs and stories that have been passed down through generations in Morocco.
Well, let's get started. I'd like to ask you, can you tell us how Hanukkah was generally viewed and celebrated in Morocco?
I would love to. Hanukkah in Morocco was a joyous holiday, but it was not given the same level of emphasis that it has here in the United States. It was considered a minor holiday compared to others like Passover or Rosh Hashanah. The focus was much more on spirituality and family. The celebration was simple, yet deeply meaningful, centering around the menorah lighting and reflecting on the miracles of the holiday.
Okay, so you mentioned that Hanukkah in Morocco was much more spiritual than how we celebrate it in the U.S. Can you describe what made it feel more spiritual?
The spiritual aspect came from the quiet reverence of the menorah lighting. My father would return from the synagogue, and the whole family will gather around him as he chanted Hanerot Halalu. He lit the menorah wicks and recited Psalm 30. We all sat quietly, absorbing the moment. There were no distractions, no gifts, no parties, just a pure focus on the meaning of the holiday and the miracles it commemorates.
So your father would chant Hanero Talalu and recite Psalm 30 during the menorah lighting. Can you walk us through what a typical menorah lighting ceremony was like in your home?
Our menorah, which is between 125 and 150 years old, was brought out of the dining room sideboard drawer amidst songs and yo-yos of the women present. It was wall-mounted by my father as we sat around him, who was chanting in his melodious voice the songs he learned from his own father, a Hazan, descended from a long line of cantors going back to the 12th century in Spain. The only light was that of the menorah. We sat in silence until the last flame burnt out. It was a time for unity and reflection and quizzes about the meaning of the holiday, the history of Hanukkah, and the valiant Maccabees whose identity we all assume. We were either Judah Maccabee or Simon Maccabee.
Okay. I love that you said that the menorah was wall-mounted and handmade. Can you describe it in detail and explain why olive oil was always used instead of candles?
Our menorah was a work of art. It was handmade from bronze by an artist, Shalom Sarfati, who was renowned in Morocco for his religious works. It was mounted on the wall. It had 9 holders, which were filled each night with pure olive oil, since it was the only combustible used to light the dwellings of our forefathers, and at the same time recalling the miracle of the oil that burned for 8 days in the temple.
You also noted that only one menorah was used per household. Here in the States, we see often multiple menorahs being used. Can you talk about the significance of that tradition and why multiple menorahs weren't lit in the same home?
The Baal Habayit, who is the head of the household, was the only one to lead the menorah. He was a priest. He was the one officiating. And since the temple had only one candelabrum, how vain of us to try to have many more. If the temple could accommodate itself with one menorah, why should we have more than that?
Okay, let's go back in time a bit. You mentioned that Jews arrived in Morocco about 2,000 years ago and settled near the Atlas Mountains. How did this long history influence the Hanukkah traditions you practiced?
The Jews in Morocco maintained many traditions that were rooted in ancient Israel, from which they came, according to archaeological finds and oral traditions, as early as after the destruction of the first temple and assuredly after the second temple. These traditions, like using olive oil in the menorah or the communal aspect of the holidays, felt very connected to the land and history of the Jewish people. Our celebration reflected the continuity of our heritage.
You know, Sam and Deanna, gift giving is a big part of Hanukkah in the U.S. Often, like Christmas is for Christians, it's taken similar resemblance in the U.S., but you noted that that wasn't the case in Morocco. Instead, there was a stronger emphasis on giving.
That's
Could
right.
you tell us about the traditions of making and what you did?
I was very surprised by the celebration of Hanukkah in the United States. It was for me an imitation, a pale imitation of Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
In Hanukkah, in Morocco, Hanukkah was not about receiving gifts. It was about giving. Our parents made sure we had money for alms to the needy. On the last day of Hanukkah, we held an open house. The women in the family would make Makroud, a delicious fried pastry, which was a delicacy even in temple days. Dipped in honey and sprinkled with sesame seeds or sugar, it was served to everyone who came to the house with mint tea. These pastries were beautifully arranged on silver trays and shared with family, neighbors, and guests, and all who could not get out and walk. We're not ambulatory.
Well, it sounds like the act of sharing the Makroud was just as important as eating it. Can you share more about how families and neighbors connected during this tradition?
Absolutely. Sharing Makroud brought joy and strengthened bond within the community. Children were often the ones delivering the trays to neighbors, and it created a festive atmosphere. It was not just about the food, it was about the connections we built and the happiness that came from giving to others.
One detail I loved is that everyone would stay together around the menorah until the last flame had burned out. What lessons or values were passed down during that quiet, reflective time?
Well, it taught us patience, respect, the importance of family. We would sit together, really huddled, reflecting on the miracles of Hanukkah and discussing the values of faith and resilience. It was a way to pass down our traditions and stories to the next generation in a meaningful and uninterrupted way. Hence the word hada, which is really tying and binding one generation to another.
Oh, and finally, Deanna, how do you feel these Moroccan traditions of Hanukkah shape the way you celebrate the holiday today or share it with your family?
I have never forsaken this tradition, whether in Panama, Honduras, the Philippines. I love Hanukkah. Even though I have lived far from Morocco, I have adhered very strictly to these wonderful traditions. I have tried to recreate that sense of spirituality and togetherness with my family. We light the menorah with olive oil, sing the blessings, and emphasize the importance of giving. It is a way to keep those beautiful traditions alive and pass them on to my children and grandchildren. I would like to add that since we came in the United States, I did not agree with this receiving of gifts, which to me was it was defeating the purpose of the holiday. So we would instead make huge trays and bring them either to the fire department or to a church or to a community center. This was our way of celebrating Hanukkah in the United States.
Well, thank you so much for honoring us and for sharing these heartfelt stories and insights about Hanukkah in Morocco.
Yeah, it's incredible to see how traditions can connect us to our heritage no matter where we are in the world.
That's right, Sam. And I'd also like to thank our listeners for joining us on this episode of Sephardic U Presents. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe and share the podcast with others who might appreciate it.
We'll see you next time as we continue to explore the rich traditions and history of Sephardic Judaism. Until then, happy Hanukkah.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.